I remember the day we moved into the farmhouse like it was yesterday. It was a fixer-upper, sure, but it was affordable, perfect for my family to start fresh. The house had a certain charm, despite its age. The wooden floors creaked with every step, and the wallpaper was peeling in spots, but we didn't mind. It felt like home, at first. The strange things began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It started with whispers, soft murmurs that would echo through the halls when no one was around. I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, right? But then the whispers started calling my name. John. It was faint at first, barely a breath against the walls. I'd stop and listen, try and make sense of it. But when I looked around, no one was there. I shrugged it off as my imagination getting the best of me. But soon, my wife, Clara, began to hear it too. She'd be in the kitchen, and she'd swear she heard me calling her from upstairs when I was clearly still in the room with her. The kids, Sarah and Max, were the next to notice. At night, I'd hear them muttering to each other about hearing footsteps in the hallway, or someone standing by the door. I tried to reassure them. It was just the house, old and full of history. But my reassurances didn't do much to ease their growing unease. One night, it all came to a head. I had just gotten home from work, tired and ready for a quiet evening. But when I walked through the door, something felt off. Clara was sitting in the living room, staring at the wall with wide, terrified eyes. "They were here again," she whispered. "Who?" "The voices, they were calling me. But they weren't just whispers this time. They were saying things. Things only you and I know." My blood ran cold. We hadn't told anyone anything about the house. No one but the real estate agent knew we had bought it. I tried to stay calm, telling Clara it was just the stress of the move, but deep down, I felt the weight of something sinister pressing against me. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, but my thoughts kept drifting back to those whispers. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed down into the basement. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the cold, dark space. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. I shone my flashlight around, my heart pounding in my chest. There, in the corner, something caught my eye. A strange symbol etched into the stone floor. It looked old, crude, like it had been carved hastily with a sharp object. I knelt down to inspect it, my fingers brushing over the jagged lines. As I stared at the symbol, I heard it, the whispers. But they weren't whispers anymore. They were voices. John. They were all around me now. Voices I recognized. Clara's voice, Max's, Sarah's, even my own. They were all calling to me, pleading for help. I spun around, shining the flashlight in every direction. There was no one. The house was empty. But the voices, they kept coming. Louder now, frantic. I had to get out of there. I stumbled back toward the stairs, my breath shallow, my pulse racing. But as I turned to leave, something in the basement shifted. The ground beneath me cracked, splitting open in jagged lines, and cold, bony hands shot out from the cracks. I screamed, trying to back away, but the hands were fast, grabbing at my legs, pulling me down. In that moment, I knew it was too late. The whispers had become something far worse. I was trapped in that dark, suffocating place, and the voices, they were no longer begging. They were laughing. When I woke up, it was morning, and I was back upstairs in the hallway, as though nothing had happened. But the house was different, empty. The silence was suffocating. I ran to the bedroom, calling out for Clara, for Sarah, for Max, but the room was bare. The beds were neatly made, everything in its place, but there were no signs of them. No trace. No indication that they had ever been there. Panic gripped me. I searched every room, every corner of the house, but I found nothing. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The house felt colder now, almost alive, as if it were watching me. I went back to the basement, drawn by some terrible force I couldn't understand. The symbol on the floor was still there, glowing faintly. And as I stood over it, I felt the floor shift beneath me again, as though it were alive, hungry. There was no escape. I was alone now, forever bound to the house. The voices still echo in my mind, a constant presence in the back of my thoughts. Some nights, I hear them again. Clara, Max, Sarah, calling for help, just as they did before. But I can't help them. No one can. The house isn't empty, and I'm not the only one left here. It was a late autumn evening when I moved into the old house on the edge of town. It had been sitting vacant for years, and the previous owners had let it fall into disrepair. Still, it was all I could afford, and I liked the idea of a quiet place away from the noise of the city. The house had a certain charm, even in its dilapidated state. The first few nights were uneventful, save for the creaking of the wooden floors and the faint rustling of the wind outside. But as the days passed, I began to notice small things that didn't quite add up. It started with the lights. The bulbs would flicker, then go out completely, even when I had just replaced them. I assumed it was an issue with the wiring, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then, strange things started happening with the furniture. I'd leave a chair at the kitchen table one night, only to find it pushed to the side the next morning, facing a wall. My coat would be draped over the back of the chair one moment, and then it would be lying in a completely different spot the next, as though someone had moved it. The thing that unnerved me the most was the mirrors. In every room, there was a mirror, some small, some large, and every time I passed one, I had the strangest sensation of being watched. I'd glance at my reflection and then quickly look away, but for some reason, I could never shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sometimes, I'd swear I saw something in the corner of the mirror, a shadow moving just out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. But as time went on, the feeling of unease grew stronger. One night, I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, when I heard something heavy fall upstairs. It was a loud thud, like a large object had been dropped. I froze, staring at the ceiling, but after a few seconds, everything went silent again. I waited for a moment, then got up and went to investigate. I climbed the stairs, half expecting to find a broken lamp or a misplaced piece of furniture. But when I reached the top, everything was undisturbed. No fallen objects, no signs of anything out of place. Just the quiet, empty hallway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. The house was old, and it groaned and creaked as if it were alive, shifting and settling with each passing hour. But there was something else, something deeper in the silence, something that made my skin crawl. Around 3 a.m., I heard again a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving down the hallway. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of them growing louder with each step. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I couldn't move. I felt as though I were frozen in place, unable to even blink. The footsteps stood still, just beyond the door, for what felt like an eternity. Then, finally, they began to retreat. The sound of the footsteps slowly faded, and once again, everything was silent. I waited a long time before I dared to get out of bed. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew I had to see what was going on. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and tiptoed out of the room. The hallway was dark, but I could see the faint outlines of the furniture through the light of the flashlight. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I walked slowly toward the staircase, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As I passed the mirror on the wall, I glanced into it. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing behind me, a figure, tall and indistinct, with no face. But when I whipped around, the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day, I packed up my things and left. I didn't even bother to clean up or lock the door behind me. I just left, my heart still racing from the fear that had gripped me in that house. I never went back, and I never found out who or what had been walking through the house. The house was eventually sold, and new tenants moved in. A few months later, I heard from a friend that they had left abruptly too. No one really talked about the house much after that, but I knew something was there, something in the shadows, something that moved when I wasn't looking, and I don't think it ever left. The advertisement was simple: small room for rent, quiet area, no questions asked. It was enough to catch my attention. I had been searching for a place to stay for weeks, moving from one cramped apartment to another, each more expensive than the last. I needed somewhere affordable, somewhere I could just settle for a while. So when I saw the listing for the old house on the outskirts of town, I called right away. The landlord, a woman in her late 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes, greeted me when I arrived. She didn't say much, only handed me the keys and showed me to the room. The house was old, large, and in desperate need of repair. The wood floors creaked with every step, and the windows were fogged with years of neglect. But the room itself was small, plain, and exactly what I needed. "Don't worry about the other tenants," she told me before I left. "They keep to themselves." I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe I was just grateful to find somewhere to stay, or maybe I didn't want to question her. I hadn't seen anyone else in the house. At first, I thought it was just that everyone kept to their rooms, like the landlord said. But as the days wore on, it became harder to ignore the oddities. I would hear the faint sound of footsteps at night, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to echo through the walls. But when I opened my door, the hall would be empty. The house, though large, never seemed to have a sound of life to it. No chatter, no music, no movement. Just silence. Then there was the matter of the kitchen. I noticed the refrigerator door would be open sometimes when I entered the room, though I never remembered leaving it that way. And sometimes the cupboard doors would creak open, as if someone had been rummaging through them. Yet I was always alone when I used the kitchen, or so I thought. It started to get unsettling. One evening, I returned to my room after running errands, and I found something strange. A chair, which I had left in front of my desk, was now positioned at the window, facing out. I hadn't moved it. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, so I shrugged it off, though unease gnawed at me. The next night, I was jolted awake by a loud bang from the hallway. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding in my chest, but once again, the house was still. Nothing but the quiet air. That night, I decided to explore. I crept through the hallways, moving quietly, listening for any sign of movement. My footsteps echoed in the dark corridors. When I reached the end of the hall, I noticed something odd. One of the doors was cracked open. It was the door to the attic. The stairs were narrow, creaking beneath my weight. As I climbed, the air grew colder, thick with dust and something else. Something sour, like decay. The attic was dim, lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I looked around, but all I could see were old boxes, forgotten furniture, and cobwebs. Then, in the far corner, something caught my eye. It was a chair, a worn armchair, facing the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was just another piece of old furniture, but then I noticed something more disturbing. The chair was facing a mirror on the wall. The glass was cracked, reflecting the shadows in an unsettling way. I stepped closer, and I saw the faintest outline in the mirror. It wasn't my reflection. It wasn't even human. The shape was tall, thin, and seemed to distort unnaturally, like a dark figure lurking just out of sight. The next morning, I went to confront the landlord. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, her expression unreadable. I told her what I'd seen, the footsteps, the strange chair, the figure in the mirror. She didn't respond at first. She just stared at me with those sharp eyes, like she was waiting for something. Finally, she spoke. "I told you there were no questions," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're the last tenant, you know. The others never stayed long." I didn't understand what she meant. "They always leave," she continued. "They always come, stay a few weeks, and then they're gone. No trace, no explanation. Just like you, just like the others." Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The house, the silence, the strange occurrences, it was all part of a cycle. Each tenant came, saw the things they weren't supposed to see, and then vanished. I hadn't come to stay. I had come to be part of the house's history. Before I could say anything more, the landlord stood and handed me a small key. "The attic is locked for a reason," she said, her voice cold. "But you'll learn soon enough.